You find yourself standing at the edge of a new reality, the truth dawning on you all at once, a truth so unsettling, so quietly revolutionary, that it threatens to unravel the very fabric of your identity. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you have ever denied, every impulse you have suppressed, every shadow you have cast behind you, is not only alive but is in fact the key to your deepest power. Picture yourself in a world where the line between good and evil, light and darkness, is not a boundary but a mirror, one that reflects not just what you wish to see, but everything you have refused to acknowledge. As you take your first breath this morning, a startling realization settles in. Nothing will ever be the same. The air feels heavier, charged with the weight of unspoken truths. You sense it in the silence between your thoughts, in the flicker of doubt that crosses your mind when you look in the mirror. There is a presence there, something ancient and familiar, lurking just beyond the reach of your conscious mind. It is the part of you that you have spent a lifetime avoiding, the part that whispers forbidden desires, harbors secret resentments, and dreams of things you dare not name. Suddenly, you're faced with a moment that makes you question everything you thought you knew. What if the darkness within you is not your enemy, but your greatest ally? What if the very qualities you have been taught to fear, anger, envy, lust, pride, are not flaws to be eradicated, but sources of untapped strength? What if the path to wholeness does not lie in the relentless pursuit of virtue, but in the courageous embrace of your own shadow? You stand at the threshold of this paradox, heart pounding, mind racing. The world around you seems unchanged. Cars hum along the street, sunlight filters through the window, the clock ticks steadily onward. Yet inside, a storm is gathering. You feel the tension between who you are and who you pretend to be, between the mask you wear and the face you hide even from yourself. You sense the presence of something vast and unknowable, a force that has shaped your every decision, colored your every relationship, and haunted your every dream. Why do you fear your own darkness? Why do you flinch from the parts of yourself that do not fit the story you tell the world? Is it because you have been taught that goodness is the absence of evil, that light can only exist by banishing the night? Or is it because you sense, deep down, that the darkness holds a power you cannot control, a power that could destroy you or set you free? You remember moments from your past times when anger surged through you like wildfire, when jealousy gnawed at your insides, when desire threatened to overwhelm your reason. You remember the shame that followed, the desperate attempts to push those feelings away, to bury them beneath layers of politeness, productivity, and self-control. You remember the relief you felt when you succeeded, the pride in your own restraint, but you also remember the emptiness that lingered, the sense that something vital had been lost. What if you have been fighting the wrong battle all along? What if the true enemy is not the darkness within you, but your refusal to face it? What if every act of denial, every moment of repression, only makes your shadow grow stronger, more insistent, more dangerous? What if the parts of yourself you fear the most are the very ones you need to become whole? You begin to see the outlines of a deeper truth, one that defies the comforting certainties of conventional wisdom. You realize that the world is not divided into heroes and villains, saints and sinners, light and dark. Instead, every human soul is a battleground, a place where opposing forces clash and intermingle, where the seeds of greatness and destruction are sown side by side. You sense that your own life is a microcosm of this eternal struggle, that every choice you make is a negotiation between the parts of yourself you love and the parts you fear. But what if the struggle itself is an illusion? What if the light and the dark are not enemies but partners in a cosmic dance? What if your shadow is not a monster to be slain, but a guide to be followed, a source of wisdom, creativity, and resilience? What if the path to your highest self leads not away from your darkness, but straight through it? You feel the ground shift beneath your feet, as if the very laws of reality are being rewritten. The questions multiply, each one more unsettling than the last. If you were to embrace your shadow, what would you become? Would you lose yourself in chaos? Or would you discover a new kind of order? Would you become a danger to others? Or would you finally learn to love them and yourself without reservation or fear? You think of the stories you have been told since childhood, the tales of heroes who conquer evil, of saints who resist temptation, of leaders who rise above their baser instincts. You realize that these stories are not just entertainment, they are blueprints for how to live, maps for navigating the treacherous terrain of the human soul. But what if the maps are incomplete? What if the territory is far stranger, more dangerous, and more beautiful than you have ever imagined? You recall the words of ancient philosophers and modern psychologists, the warnings and promises of those who have dared to explore the shadowlands of the psyche. You remember hearing about Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who spoke of the shadow, the hidden, repressed aspects of the self that, if left unacknowledged, can wreak havoc on our lives. You remember reading that Jung believed the shadow is not just a repository of evil, but a wellspring of creativity, vitality, and transformation. You wonder what it would mean to take his ideas seriously, to turn toward your darkness rather than away from it. But the thought terrifies you. What if you are not strong enough to face what you find? What if the darkness consumes you, leaving nothing but ruin in its wake? What if the very act of looking into your own shadow is an act of madness, a descent into chaos from which there is no return? And yet, you cannot turn back. The questions have taken root in your mind, growing like vines, twisting around your certainties, pulling you toward the unknown. You feel a strange exhilaration, a sense that you are on the verge of a discovery that could change everything. You sense that the answers you seek are not out there, in the world of facts and opinions, but in here, in the hidden chambers of your own soul. You begin to notice the ways your shadow shapes your life, even when you pretend it does not exist. You see it in the arguments you have with loved ones, in the envy you feel toward those who seem more successful, in the secret pleasures you indulge when no one is watching. You see it in the dreams that haunt your sleep, in the anxieties that gnaw at your peace, in the moments of self-sabotage that leave you bewildered and ashamed. You realize that your shadow is not a distant threat, but a constant companion, a silent partner in every decision you make, every word you speak, every thought you think. You begin to wonder what would happen if you stopped running, if you turned to face the darkness and asked it what it wants. Would it destroy you, or would it reveal a hidden treasure, a source of strength you never knew you possessed? The paradox deepens. The more you try to banish your shadow, the more powerful it becomes. The more you deny your darkness, the more it controls you from behind the scenes. But when you acknowledge it, when you bring it into the light of consciousness, something miraculous happens. The shadow loses its power to terrify, and instead becomes a source of insight, a guide to the parts of yourself that are crying out for attention, for healing, for integration. You begin to see that the journey into your own darkness is not a descent into evil, but a quest for wholeness. You realize that the parts of yourself you have rejected are not your enemies, but your allies, messengers bearing gifts you cannot receive any other way. You sense that the path to your true self leads not through the denial of your shadow, but through its embrace. But the journey is not easy. It requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront the most uncomfortable truths about yourself. It demands that you let go of the comforting illusions that have kept you safe and step into the unknown with nothing but your own integrity to guide you. It asks you to trust that the darkness within you is not a curse, but a calling, a summons to become more than you ever thought possible. As you stand at the edge of this new reality, you feel the weight of the choice before you. Will you continue to hide from your shadow, to pretend that the darkness does not exist, or will you take the first step into the unknown, trusting that the journey will lead you not to destruction, but to transformation? The questions hang in the air, heavy with possibility. You sense that the answers will not come easily, that the path ahead will be fraught with danger and uncertainty. But you also sense that the rewards are beyond anything you have ever imagined. A life of authenticity, creativity, and power. A life in which you are no longer at war with yourself. As the first light of dawn breaks through the window, you realize that you are not alone. Countless others have stood where you stand now, faced the same questions, felt the same fear. Some have turned away, retreating into the safety of denial. But others have pressed on, guided by a vision of what lies beyond the darkness, a vision of wholeness, of integration, of a self that is both light and shadow, both human and divine. You take a deep breath, feeling the tension in your body, the racing of your heart. You know that the journey will not be easy, that the path ahead is shrouded in mystery, but you also know that you cannot turn back. that the only way forward is through the darkness into the heart of your own shadow. And so you stand at the threshold, poised between fear and hope, between the known and the unknown. The questions echo in your mind, urging you onward, deeper, into the mystery of your own soul. What will you find there? What will you become? The answers await, just beyond the edge of your awareness, in the place where light and darkness meet. The journey has begun. You step forward, drawn by a force you cannot name, compelled by the gravity of your own unasked questions. The world around you seems unchanged, yet you sense a subtle shift, a crack in the surface of things, a glimpse beneath the mask of ordinary life. You begin to wonder, why is it so hard to face your own darkness? Why does the very thought of embracing your shadow fill you with dread, as if you are trespassing on forbidden ground? The answer, you suspect, is not simple. It is woven into the fabric of your upbringing, stitched into the stories you were told as a child, encoded in the very language you use to describe yourself and others. From your earliest days, you were taught to divide the world into opposites, good and bad, right and wrong, pure and impure. You learned to seek approval by displaying your virtues and to hide your flaws in the shadows, where no one could see them, least of all yourself. But where did this division come from? Why do you feel compelled to split yourself in two? To present a mask to the world while hiding your true face in the dark? The roots of this problem run deep, reaching back through centuries of philosophy, religion, and psychology. You recall the words of Friedrich Nietzsche, who warned that whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. You remember Carl Jung's haunting insight: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You begin to see that the problem is not just personal, but collective. It is a sickness of the soul that afflicts entire cultures, a hidden wound that festers beneath the surface of civilization. You think of the ancient myths, the stories of gods and demons, of heroes who descend into the underworld to confront the forces of chaos. You realize that these stories are not just entertainment, they are maps of the human psyche, guides for navigating the perilous journey into the unknown. But somewhere along the way, something went wrong. The wisdom of the ancients was forgotten, replaced by a new creed, the worship of light, the denial of darkness. You see it in the teachings of organized religion, which often equate goodness with purity and evil with corruption, urging you to purge yourself of sin, to strive for perfection, to banish all that is unworthy from your heart. You see it in the ideals of modern society, which reward conformity and punish deviation, which celebrate success and stigmatize failure, which demand that you present a flawless image to the world at all costs. You begin to understand that the problem is not just that you have a shadow, but that you have been taught to fear it, to hate it, to pretend it does not exist. You have been conditioned to believe that your worth depends on your ability to suppress your darker impulses, to hide your flaws, to become a paragon of virtue. But in doing so, you have cut yourself off from a vital part of your own being, a part that is not evil, but simply human. You recall the words of Arthur Schopenhauer, who wrote that to overcome difficulties is to experience the full delight of existence. You realize that the difficulties he spoke of are not just external obstacles, but internal conflicts, the struggle to reconcile the warring parts of your own soul. You remember Aldous Huxley's observation that there is only one corner of the universe you can be certain of improving, and that's your own self. But how can you improve yourself if you refuse to see yourself as you truly are? You begin to see the outlines of a hidden force, a psychological mechanism that shapes your thoughts, your feelings, your very sense of self. It is the force of repression, the act of pushing unwanted thoughts, feelings, and desires out of conscious awareness, burying them in the depths of the unconscious mind. You realize that repression is not just a personal failing, but a universal human tendency, a defense mechanism that protects you from pain, but also keeps you from growth. You think of the times you have felt inexplicable anger, sudden jealousy, irrational fear. You remember moments when you acted in ways that seemed out of character, when you said things you later regretted, when you sabotaged your own happiness for reasons you could not explain. You begin to suspect that these moments were not accidents, but messages from your shadow, signals that something within you was crying out to be heard. You recall Jung's concept of the shadow self, the collection of traits, impulses, and memories that you reject or disown, but which continue to influence your behavior from the depths of the unconscious. You realize that the shadow is not just a repository of evil, but a reservoir of potential, a source of creativity, vitality, and wisdom that you can access only by facing what you fear. But why is it so hard to do this? Why do you resist the call to wholeness, even when you know it is what you need? The answer, you realize, lies in the nature of the ego, the part of you that seeks to maintain control, to preserve a coherent sense of identity, to avoid pain at all costs. The ego is like a fortress, built to protect you from the chaos of the unconscious. But in doing so, it also keeps you trapped, cut off from the deeper currents of your own being. You remember Jean-Paul Sartre's assertion that hell is other people, but you begin to suspect that hell is also the prison you build for yourself, the walls you erect to keep your shadow at bay. You realize that the price of safety is stagnation, that the cost of denial is the loss of your own soul. You think of Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of the concentration camps and emerged with a profound insight that meaning is found not in the avoidance of suffering, but in the courage to face it, to find purpose even in the darkest of circumstances. You realize that your own suffering, the pain of confronting your shadow, the fear of what you might find, is not a punishment, but an invitation. It is a summons to become more than you are, to integrate the parts of yourself you have rejected, to become whole. You begin to see how this hidden problem shapes every aspect of your life. It is the reason you feel disconnected from yourself, the source of your anxiety and depression, the root of your self-destructive habits. It is the force that drives you to seek approval from others, to compare yourself to impossible standards, to hide your true feelings behind a mask of competence and control. You realize that the problem is not just psychological but philosophical. It is a question of how you define yourself, of what it means to be human. Are you a collection of virtues? A list of accomplishments? A mask you wear for the world? Or are you something deeper? Something more mysterious? A being who contains both light and darkness, both order and chaos, both creation and destruction. You begin to suspect that the answer lies not in choosing one side over the other, but in embracing the paradox, in holding the tension between opposites, in learning to live with ambiguity and uncertainty. You realize that the path to wholeness is not a straight line, but a spiral, a journey that takes you deeper and deeper into the mystery of your own soul. But the journey is fraught with danger. The forces that oppose you are not just internal, but external. Cultural norms, social expectations, the judgments of others. You sense the weight of history pressing down on you, the accumulated wisdom and folly of generations who have struggled with the same questions, who have faced the same fears. You realize that you are not alone in your struggle. Every human being carries a shadow. Every culture has its taboos. Every society has its scapegoats. You begin to see the ways in which the denial of darkness leads to collective violence, to the persecution of outsiders, to the creation of enemies and monsters. You realize that the problem is not just personal, but political, that the fate of the world depends on your willingness to face your own shadow. You feel the tension building, the sense that something vital is at stake. You realize that the choice before you is not just a matter of personal growth, but of survival. Will you continue to deny your darkness, to project it onto others, to perpetuate the cycle of fear and violence? Or will you have the courage to turn inward, to confront the hidden forces that shape your life, to become the author of your own destiny? The questions press in on you, demanding answers. You sense that the journey ahead will not be easy, that it will require everything you have: courage, honesty, humility, and above all, a willingness to embrace the unknown. But you also sense that the rewards are beyond anything you have ever imagined. A life of authenticity, creativity, and power. A life in which you are no longer at war with yourself. As you stand at the threshold of this new understanding, you feel the weight of the past falling away, the promise of a new future opening before you. You realize that the journey into your own darkness is not a descent into madness, but a quest for meaning, a search for the lost parts of yourself, a journey toward wholeness. But the consequences of denial are real, and they are profound. You sense that the next step is to confront the unseen forces that shape your life, to understand the ways in which your shadow influences your thoughts, your feelings, your actions. You feel the urgency of the task before you, the sense that time is running out, that the world cannot wait for you to find your courage. The path ahead is shrouded in mystery, but you know that you must go on. The journey has only just begun. You move through your day, outwardly unchanged, but now you sense the invisible machinery at work beneath the surface. The world hums with routine, conversations, obligations, the endless scroll of information, but you are haunted by the knowledge that something deeper is shaping every moment. You begin to notice the subtle ways your shadow asserts itself, not as a monster in the night, but as a silent architect of your reality. You catch yourself snapping at a loved one for a trivial mistake, the anger flaring up before you can stop it. Later, you wonder where it came from, why it felt so disproportionate. You remember Jung's warning, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You realize that your shadow is not just a hidden part of you, it is the author of your patterns, the ghostwriter of your story. You see it in the way you judge others, the way you recoil from those who embody the traits you most despise in yourself, the colleague whose arrogance infuriates you, the friend whose neediness drains you, the stranger whose recklessness makes your skin crawl. You begin to suspect that these reactions are not about them at all, but about the parts of yourself you cannot bear to acknowledge. Projection, Jung called it, the act of casting your own shadow onto the world, of seeing in others what you refuse to see in yourself. But the consequences do not end there. You notice how your shadow shapes your ambitions, your desires, your very sense of possibility. You find yourself sabotaging opportunities, shrinking from challenges, settling for less than you truly want. You tell yourself that you are being realistic, that you are avoiding disappointment, but deep down you know the truth. You are afraid of your own power, afraid of what might happen if you let your shadow speak. You begin to see how this hidden force shapes not just your personal life, but the world around you. You watch the news and see the same patterns playing out on a grand scale. Nations demonizing each other, groups scapegoating outsiders, leaders projecting their own fears and insecurities onto the world stage. You realize that the denial of the shadow is not just a private tragedy, but a collective catastrophe, a force that drives conflict, division, and violence on every level of society. You think of the cognitive biases that shape your perception, the shortcuts your brain takes to avoid discomfort, to preserve the illusion of control. Confirmation bias, which leads you to seek out information that supports your existing beliefs and ignore anything that challenges them. The fundamental attribution error, which causes you to blame others for their flaws while excusing your own. The just world hypothesis, which reassures you that good things happen to good people and bad things to bad people, even when reality is far more complex. You realize that these biases are not just quirks of the mind, but defenses against the shadow ways of keeping the darkness at bay, of maintaining the fragile boundaries of the self. You see how they shape your relationships, your choices, your very sense of reality. You begin to wonder how much of your life is truly your own, and how much is dictated by forces you cannot see. You recall the insights of neuroscience, the discoveries that have revealed the brain's astonishing capacity for self-deception. You learn that the conscious mind is only a tiny fraction of the whole, that most of your thoughts, feelings, and actions are determined by unconscious processes beyond your awareness. You realize that the shadow is not just a metaphor, but a biological reality, a network of neural pathways shaped by experience, reinforced by habit, hidden from view. You begin to see how cultural conditioning amplifies these effects, teaching you what to value, what to fear, what to hide. You remember the lessons of childhood, the rules you learned without even realizing it. Don't be too loud. Don't be too needy. Don't show anger, or sadness, or desire. You realize that these rules were not just about behavior, but about identity, about who you are allowed to be, and who you must pretend not to be. You see how these lessons are reinforced at every turn, by parents, teachers, peers, the media. You notice the subtle punishments for stepping out of line, the rewards for conformity, the shame that follows any deviation from the norm. You realize that the shadow is not just a personal burden, but a social construct, a product of collective denial, maintained by the silent agreement of the group. You begin to feel the urgency of the problem, the sense that something vital is at stake. You see how the denial of the shadow leads to a life of quiet desperation, of unfulfilled potential, of dreams deferred and passions denied. You notice the ways people numb themselves through work, through entertainment, through addiction, trying to fill the void left by the parts of themselves they have abandoned. You sense the cost of this denial, not just in your own life, but in the world at large. You see it in the rise of extremism, in the polarization of politics, in the epidemic of loneliness and despair. You realize that the refusal to face the shadow is at the root of so much suffering, so much violence, so much waste. You think of the stories you tell yourself to make sense of it all. The narratives of victimhood and blame, of innocence and guilt, of us and them. You realize that these stories are not just reflections of reality, but attempts to control it, to impose order on chaos, to keep the darkness at bay. But the darkness does not go away. It waits, patient and silent, growing stronger with every act of denial. You begin to see the outlines of a trap, a prison built not of walls, but of beliefs, habits, and fears. You realize that the more you try to escape your shadow, the more tightly it binds you. The more you deny your darkness, the more it controls you from behind the scenes. You sense that the only way out is through, that the path to freedom lies in the very place you fear to go. But the consequences of denial are not just negative. They are also creative, generative, paradoxical. You notice how your shadow gives rise to your greatest strength, your most profound insights, your deepest connections. You see how the parts of yourself you have rejected are also the source of your empathy, your creativity, your capacity for transformation. You think of the artists, the visionaries, the rebels who have dared to embrace their shadows, to turn their darkness into light. You remember the words of Jung, "The gold is in the dark." You realize that the shadow is not just a source of suffering, but a wellspring of possibility, a reservoir of energy waiting to be tapped. You begin to wonder what your life would look like if you stopped running, if you turned to face your shadow and asked it what it wants. Would you find chaos, or would you find meaning? Would you lose yourself, or would you finally become whole? You sense that the answer is both, that the journey into the shadow is a descent into chaos and a return to order, a death and a rebirth, a loss and a gain. You realize that the shadow is not your enemy, but your teacher, a guide to the parts of yourself you have forgotten, a key to the mysteries of your own soul. But the journey is not easy. It requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront the most uncomfortable truths about yourself. It demands that you let go of the comforting illusions that have kept you safe and step into the unknown with nothing but your own integrity to guide you. It asks you to trust that the darkness within you is not a curse but a calling, a summons to become more than you ever thought possible. You feel the urgency of the task before you, the sense that time is running out, that the world cannot wait for you to find your courage. You realize that the consequences of denial are not just personal, but collective, that the fate of the world depends on your willingness to face your own shadow. You stand at the edge of a precipice, looking down into the abyss. You feel the pull of the unknown, the promise of transformation, the terror of letting go. You know that the journey will not be easy, that the path ahead is shrouded in mystery, but you also know that you cannot turn back, that the only way forward is through the darkness, into the heart of your own shadow. You sense that a breakthrough is near, that the answers you seek are just beyond the edge of your awareness. You feel the tension building, the sense that something vital is about to be revealed. You realize that the journey into the shadow is not just a descent, but a return, a homecoming to the parts of yourself you have lost, a reunion with your own soul. The questions echo in your mind, urging you onward, deeper into the mystery of your own being. What will you find there? What will you become? The answers await, just beyond the edge of your awareness, in the place where light and darkness meet. The trap is real, but so is the possibility of escape. The time has come to rebel, to break free from the prison of denial, to claim the power that lies hidden in your own darkness. You stand at the threshold, the abyss yawning before you, the weight of your shadow pressing in from all sides. The world you once knew, safe, predictable, ordered by the rules of denial, now feels like a cage. The air is thick with the scent of possibility and danger. You sense that the time for passivity has ended. Something within you stirs, restless and wild, refusing to be silenced any longer. The rebellion begins not with a shout, but with a whisper. What if you stopped running? You take a step forward, trembling but resolute. The old stories of virtue without vice, of light without darkness, begin to unravel. You realize that the only way out of the trap is to turn and face the very thing you have spent your life avoiding. The rebellion is not against the world, but against the tyranny of your own fear. It is a revolt against the false self, the mask you have worn for so long that you have forgotten the face beneath. You remember the words of Jung. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. The rebellion is radical because it demands that you do the unthinkable. Embrace your shadow, not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a part of yourself to be integrated. You begin to see that the path to freedom is not a flight from darkness, but a journey into it, a descent into the underworld where the treasures of the soul are hidden. You recall the myth of Orpheus, who descended into Hades to rescue his beloved Eurydice. You realize that the journey into the shadow is not just a personal quest, but a universal archetype, a story that has been told in countless forms across cultures and centuries. The hero's journey is not a march toward perfection, but a spiral into the depths of the self, a confrontation with the monsters that guard the gates of transformation. You begin to see that the rebellion is not a solitary act, but a collective movement, a revolution of consciousness that has been gathering momentum for generations. You think of the artists, the mystics, the visionaries who have dared to break free from the prison of denial. You remember Nietzsche's call to become who you are, to embrace the chaos within as the source of creativity and power. You recall Huxley's vision of the doors of perception, flung open by those brave enough to face their own darkness. But how do you begin? How do you break free from the habits of a lifetime, the patterns etched into your very being? The answer, you realize, is both simple and profound. You must turn toward your shadow with curiosity, not condemnation. You must become an explorer of your own inner world, a cartographer of the unknown. You start by noticing the moments when your shadow appears, when anger flares, when envy bites, when fear paralyzes. Instead of pushing these feelings away, you invite them in. You ask them what they want, what they are trying to tell you. You listen, not with judgment, but with compassion. You realize that every emotion, no matter how dark, is a messenger, a signal from the depths of your being, pointing towards something that needs to be seen, understood, integrated. You begin to keep a journal, recording your dreams, your fears, your secret desires. You notice patterns emerging, recurring themes, symbols, images that seem to carry a hidden meaning. You realize that your unconscious is speaking to you, offering clues to the mysteries of your own soul. You learn to read the language of the shadow, to decipher its codes, to follow its guidance. You seek out practices that help you connect with your inner world. Meditation, therapy, creative expression. You find that art, music, and movement can unlock doors that words cannot. You discover that the body holds memories the mind has forgotten, that healing is not just a matter of insight, but of embodiment. You learn to trust your intuition, to honor the wisdom of your feelings, to allow yourself to be guided by something deeper than reason. You realize that breaking free is not a one-time event, but a lifelong process, a dance between light and darkness, order and chaos, creation and destruction. You learn to hold the tension between opposites, to live with ambiguity, to find meaning in the midst of uncertainty. You discover that the shadow is not a static entity, but a dynamic force, a source of energy that can be harnessed for growth, transformation, and creativity. You begin to see the world with new eyes. You notice the ways in which others are trapped by their own shadows, the ways in which denial breeds suffering, conflict, and violence. You feel a surge of compassion, a desire to help others break free from the prison of their own making. You realize that the rebellion is not just personal, but collective, that the fate of the world depends on your willingness to face your own darkness. You think of historical figures who have embodied this rebellion, those who have dared to challenge the status quo, to question the narratives of their time, to embrace the fullness of their humanity. You remember Martin Luther King Jr., who spoke of the fierce urgency of now, who called for a revolution of values, a transformation of the heart. You recall Nelson Mandela, who emerged from decades of imprisonment with a spirit unbroken, who forgave his captors and led a nation toward reconciliation. You think of Frida Kahlo, who turned her pain into art, who refused to hide her wounds, who made her suffering a source of beauty and strength. You realize that these rebels were not saints but human beings, flawed, wounded, complex. Their greatness lay not in their perfection but in their willingness to embrace their shadows, to turn their wounds into wisdom, to use their darkness as a source of light. You see that the rebellion is not about becoming someone else, but about becoming more fully yourself, about reclaiming the parts of yourself you have lost, about integrating the light and the dark into a new, more powerful whole. You begin to experiment with new ways of being. You allow yourself to feel anger without acting it out, to experience envy without letting it poison your relationships, to acknowledge fear without letting it control your choices. You discover that these emotions, when faced with honesty and compassion, lose their power to dominate you. You find that the energy once spent on denial is now available for creativity, connection, and joy. You notice changes in your relationships. You become more authentic, more vulnerable, more willing to show your true self. You find that others respond in kind, that your courage inspires them to face their own shadows. You realize that intimacy is not the absence of conflict, but the willingness to engage with the full complexity of another human being. You discover that love is not about perfection, but about acceptance, the acceptance of yourself and of others, in all their flawed humanity. You begin to see the world as a place of possibility, not limitation. You realize that the rebellion is not about destroying the old, but about creating the new, a new way of being, a new way of relating, a new way of living. You sense that the power you have been seeking is not out there but within you, waiting to be claimed, waiting to be unleashed. You feel a surge of hope, a sense of liberation, a glimpse of what it means to be truly free. You realize that the journey is far from over, that the path ahead is still shrouded in mystery. But you also know that you are no longer afraid of the darkness, that you have learned to trust the wisdom of your own soul. You stand at the edge of a new reality, the old world falling away behind you, the future opening before you like a door. You sense that the ultimate truth is near, that the final revelation is waiting just beyond the horizon. You feel the power of your own rebellion, the strength that comes from embracing your shadow, the joy that comes from becoming whole. The time has come to claim your birthright, to step into the fullness of your being, to become the author of your own destiny. The rebellion is not over, it has only just begun. As the dust of rebellion settles, you find yourself standing in a place that feels both utterly foreign and hauntingly familiar. The world is quieter now, as if holding its breath, waiting for you to see what has always been hidden in plain sight. The old boundaries between light and dark, self and shadow, hope and fear have blurred, dissolved by the fire of your own courage. You are no longer the person who began this journey. Something fundamental has shifted, and you sense that the final revelation is close, shimmering just beyond the edge of your awareness. You look back and see the path you have traveled. The denial, the struggle, the rebellion. Each step has stripped away a layer of illusion. Each confrontation with your shadow has brought you closer to something essential, something that cannot be named, but can be felt in the marrow of your bones. You realize now that the darkness you feared was never your enemy. It was your teacher, your guide, the keeper of truths too powerful to be spoken in the language of daylight. You remember the words of Jung. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The phrase echoes in your mind, resonating with a new and deeper meaning. You see now that becoming yourself is not a matter of choosing the light over the dark, but of embracing both, of holding the paradox, of living in the tension, of allowing yourself to be a vessel for the full spectrum of human experience. You feel the final question rising within you, urgent and insistent. What does it mean to be whole? The answer comes not as a thought, but as a sensation, a feeling of expansion, of integration, of coming home to yourself after a long exile. You realize that wholeness is not perfection. It is not the absence of flaws or the triumph of virtue over vice. Wholeness is the acceptance of everything you are, the willingness to stand in the center of your own being and say yes to all of it. You see now that the shadow is not a flaw to be corrected, but a source of power to be claimed. The anger you once feared becomes a force for justice. The envy you denied becomes a guide to your deepest desires. The fear you avoided becomes a wellspring of courage. You realize that every emotion, every impulse, every part of yourself you have rejected is a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of the mosaic that is your soul. You remember the ancient alchemists who sought to turn lead into gold, who believed that the transformation of matter was inseparable from the transformation of the self. You realize that the true alchemy is not the transmutation of base metals, but the integration of the shadow, the process by which the darkness within you is transformed into light, not by denial but by acceptance. You think of the world outside, the endless cycle of conflict and division, the wars waged in the name of purity, the suffering caused by the refusal to acknowledge the darkness within. You see now that the only way to heal the world is to heal yourself, to become a living example of what it means to be whole. You realize that your own journey is not just personal, but universal, that every step you take toward integration ripples outward, touching the lives of others, changing the world in ways you cannot foresee. You feel a sense of responsibility, a call to action that is both humbling and exhilarating. You realize that the ultimate truth is not a destination, but a practice, a way of being in the world, a commitment to honesty, compassion, and courage. You understand now that the work is never finished, that the journey is ongoing, that every day brings new opportunities to face your shadow, to claim your power, to become more fully yourself. You remember the words of Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in the midst of unimaginable suffering. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. You realize that the power to change the world begins with the power to change yourself, to transform your own darkness into light, to become a beacon for others who are lost in the shadows. You look around and see the world with new eyes. The people you once judged now appear as fellow travelers, each carrying their own burdens, each wrestling with their own shadows. You feel a surge of compassion, a recognition of your shared humanity, a sense of kinship that transcends difference and division. You realize that the ultimate truth is not separation, but connection, that the darkness within you is the same darkness that lives in every human heart. You feel the urge to speak, to share what you have learned, to offer hope to those who are still trapped in the prison of denial. But you know that words are not enough, that the only true teaching is by example. You resolve to live your truth, to embody the integration you have achieved, to become a living testament to the power of the shadow. You sense that the journey is far from over, that new challenges await, that the shadow will continue to test you, to tempt you, to call you deeper into the mystery of your own being. But you are no longer afraid. You have learned to trust the process, to welcome the darkness as a friend, to see every obstacle as an opportunity for growth. You realize that the ultimate truth is not a secret to be discovered, but a reality to be lived. It is the courage to face yourself, the humility to accept your limitations, the wisdom to see the beauty in your brokenness. It is the willingness to stand in the fire of your own contradictions, to hold the tension between light and dark, to become a vessel for the fullness of life. You feel a sense of peace, a quiet joy that comes from knowing that you are exactly where you are meant to be. You realize that the journey into the shadow has brought you home, not to the person you thought you should be, but to the person you truly are. You see now that the darkness was never something to be feared, but something to be embraced, something to be loved. You look to the horizon and see the dawn breaking, the first light of a new day, illuminating the world in all its complexity and beauty. You realize that the journey is both an ending and a beginning, that every moment is an opportunity to choose wholeness, to claim your power, to live your truth. You take a deep breath, feeling the fullness of your being, the integration of your light and your shadow. You know that the world will continue to challenge you, to test your resolve, to tempt you back into denial. But you are ready. You have faced the darkness and found the gold within. You have become the alchemist of your own soul. You walk forward not as a hero or a saint, but as a human being, flawed, complex, and whole. You carry the wisdom of your journey with you, a light in the darkness, a beacon for others who are still searching for their way home. And as you move through the world, you realize that the ultimate truth is not something you possess, but something you become. It is the willingness to live in the tension, to embrace the paradox, to love yourself and others in all your imperfection. It is the courage to face the darkness, the humility to accept the light, the wisdom to know that both are necessary, both are sacred, both are you. The journey never ends. The shadow is always with you, a companion on the road, a reminder of the mystery and majesty of being alive. You are no longer afraid, you are whole. And in that wholeness, you find the power to change not just yourself, but the world.